Most investigations don't actually prevent the next incident. They document what happened, assign a cause, and then close the loop. So on paper, everything looks complete. But then, weeks later, months later, even, a very similar incident happens again, and it raises an even bigger question. Are we really learning from investigations, or are we just getting better at explaining incidents after the fact? Because if the outcome is always human error, if the focus is always on what someone did wrong, then we're probably just missing something much bigger in the system. Welcome back to the Safety Brief by Intellects. I am your host, Monika, and as always, I am joined by my co host, Scott. And today we are joined by Craig from COMET. Craig, it is so great to have you here. We had Mark on last time, so it feels like we're meeting the other half of COMET. Do you want to just take a moment to introduce yourself here?
I'm not sure he would agree with that, but no, delighted to be here, Monica. Thank you very much. Yeah, my name's Craig Smith. I'm head of operations at Comet, and yeah, delighted to add to your discussion today. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you here. Scott, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm great. Vice President, Safety and Health here at Intellects, and I'm always looking forward to these type of discussions. So let's get started.
Lovely, lovely. So last time when we chatted with Mark, we got into why so many teams are measuring the wrong things and how they can create a false sense of confidence when it comes to preventing some serious incidents. Today, we're going to be taking that one step further because even when something does happen, even when there is an incident and an investigation, a lot of organizations still don't really get to the real answer. So today's episode is going to be all about that question. Why do so many investigations fail to actually prevent the next incident? So, Craig, I want to start here. In your experience, where do you think most investigations go wrong?
Yeah, I mean it's a great introductory point, I suppose. Having been involved in different types of investigations now for almost gosh, where are we now? 18 years. I know I don't look like that's the case, but yes, for quite a while now across different sectors. I think where we often see it going wrong are superficial outcomes versus real outcomes, right? And I think organizations that do this well will take a strong, close look at themselves in terms of what not just at what has happened, but why has it happened, and how do we truly learn from that to try and eliminate that repeat occurrence. I think the alternative is where organizations are a little bit more superficial with their views on what has happened and probably opt for more easier, shorter term fixes, right? Which might not necessarily be wrong, but are they truly addressing the heart or the cause of the issue long term? That then becomes questionable. So I think it's about not addressing the true underlying causation of the incident and looking at things a little bit superficially. That, I mean, I could say a number of things probably, but I think that's a nice way for me to kick that off, is not going deep enough often enough.
Yeah, Craig, I mean it's a dead end, right? Because
Yeah.
we're looking to close an investigation at the exact moment when it should be opening.
Yeah.
And and that's how I always kind of think about this when we kind of talk about it the way that you've described. Once we've kind of gone through this process, we've named a person as a cause, the system gets walked away, right, unexamined. And many times, right, the cost of stopping at that spot is that the same incident's going to show up over and over and over again. And the only thing that I cannot do is predict when it's going to happen. Maybe wearing a different set of clothes or maybe a different spot in a facility. But it's going to show back up, right? If we really don't find the root cause of what this thing happened, right there in front of us.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, surely the purpose has to be not just to acknowledge the fact that this is a one-off, right? It
Yeah.
might present as a one-off incident, but without looking properly at the characteristics of that event, you're probably losing the
Yeah.
opportunity for learning from, has that happened elsewhere in other situations? Could it happen again? The
Mhm.
objective has to be about trying to eliminate repeat occurrence. And if we don't have that goal, then probably we're not going to get to the heart of what really caused it.
I agree.
Agreed. I mean, that actually does get me thinking, and maybe we could take it one step back of what I'm hearing is that a lot of investigations are pretty good at documenting what happened, but not why it happened. Can we talk about that difference for a moment? I guess from both of your perspectives.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
absolutely. I'll take this initially, Scott, and you
yep.
can add some forensic detail that will add a lot more value, I'm sure, than I will. But the fundamental principle is the what to the why in any investigation, and really not just looking at it from a surface perspective. Sometimes, even if you have something relatively lower level in impact, there can be a habit to say, well, we only really need to fix what happened there and then, right? And maybe
Mm-hmm.
from a short-term perspective, that's okay, but we're still missing the why. And the why has to move away from whatever that particular system
Mm-hmm.
failure was or whatever that human error might have been, but understanding what and why that was allowed to happen. What were the error inducing conditions or traps or influences that allowed that to happen? So, yeah, a good investigation has to acknowledge the what is merely the starting point. That's the easy bit. We have to
Yeah.
get to the why, right? And without doing that, well, good luck in fixing that in the
Mm-hmm.
fullness of time.
Yeah, I totally agree with Craig. The what is just easier, and I've been
Mm-hmm.
practicing for 36 years, and I started my career probably looking at what happened versus why it happened, and you can timeline it, you can photograph it, you can diagram it, but the why really requires judgment, and
Mm-hmm.
I've often kind of characterized this. It requires curiosity, right? It requires a comfort with a level of ambiguity that a lot of organizations are just not up for. They go straight to the why, and many times I use this as an example is that I don't know how many investigations that I've looked at that they put the guard back on the machine after someone had been injured, and my entire question set was, well, why did we take the guard off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference between what and why, and it feels more comfortable doing the what because it's easy to put the guard back on the machine as a metaphor, right? And what we're talking about. I think there's also a speed problem. Leaders want reports closed. We don't want to spend a lot of time. The timeline of events can be written in a day. Understanding why those conditions existed takes maybe months or weeks or days, and so I think that there's a time element of this. I know when I started, I had 48 hours to start an investigation and complete it. And I don't know how many colleagues that I have that have been in that same spot of these artificial frameworks to understanding what really happened. And I think, to kind of benchmark or to base this conversation from what Craig said, it's politically a whole lot safer, right, to just tell you what happened. So I guess my test of all of this is if your report can be copy pasted into any other incident in your injury in your industry, you probably haven't gotten down to the why level, and that's really what I think as a practitioner I really need to understand to make sure I can eliminate it or mitigate it sustainably, from the work system.
So, Scott, is it safe to say that this is kind of chalked up to a time constraint issue, or would you say it's more of a mindset issue?
I think that we tend to, I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's some artificial frameworks that we have developed for organizations to work in. I think when you look at the complexity of investigations,
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to get to an end in a what I would say an efficient manner, and that's why many times you stop at what I would call the immediate causes of an output, which are the symptoms, right? It does feel good to put the guard back on, and when you kind of peer below that, you start asking different questions, and that's when it gets very, very uncomfortable. I said this just a few moments ago. When we start looking at the why, it
Mm-hmm.
requires judgment, it requires curiosity, it requires ambiguity with the organization. But what it really requires us, I think, and Craig, you can talk more about this, is an uncomfortable part of our organization where maybe there was production pressure, or maybe preventive maintenance was not done or accomplished on that particular asset that allowed some of these things to happen. So I think there's a lot of things in organizational dynamics that kind of play into this. But I think for a strong practitioner, right, a lot of our responsibility is to make sure that we not only understand the what, but the why that these things happen, and being able to have that conversation with senior leaders in an organization.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that. I'm busy taking my own notes on that, Scott. That was really interesting. So I've got no doubt people that are watching and listening will get some takeaways from that. It's really useful. But dare I make a comparison here from if we go back, you talk about outcomes being uncomfortable, right? And how do we really know we're getting to the heart of where we need to improve from? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that view is absolutely right. If you, an investigator, walk into the management team to present those findings after investigating for a week, and you're really
Mm-hmm.
happy and joyous because you know that what you're presenting back is going to cause no issues, no discomfort, and it's going to go swimmingly well, then probably you've not dug deep enough, or you've maybe avoided something for that particular reason, right? Because typically these things are not that comfortable. And actually, I
Mm-hmm.
remember,
No.
and dare I make a comparison to when we responded to COVID, right? Now, I hate to take the conversation back to that unnecessarily, but I always remember watching one of our
Yeah.
government briefings on COVID. And our First Minister at the time spoke about, if you don't feel uncomfortable in your day-to-day life now with the changes that we've introduced, are you doing enough? Are you doing enough to change, to adjust your lifestyle, to adjust your behaviors? And that really resonated with me because I knew I wasn't. I was sort
Mm-hmm.
of thinking, this is okay. I'm still going out for
Yeah.
walks and I can do this and that. But the reality is I was pushing those boundaries. The comparison I would make there is actually, yeah, if we're investigating properly and we feel a little bit uncomfortable about where we are, probably we're in the right place. And we have to be
Yeah.
brave enough as a practitioner. We have a duty when we're investigating on behalf of the organization to report properly. We often get asked to go in as third-party independent experts to help organizations out. More often than not, we present findings that aren't that well accepted, but they are the true findings. So we have a responsibility to do that, right? And it's the same with internal investigation teams as well. Discomfort should be seen as a good place to be. And I just want to pick up on that specific point, Scott. I think that's a
Yeah.
really good
Mm-hmm.
take.
No, totally. And for those of you who don't know, what COMET does really well is that root cause analysis and really looking into what things look like in practice. So, building on your point, what does strong root cause analysis actually look like, and building on that discomfort?
Well, I mean, strong root cause analysis has to be, first of all, it has to be consistent. I mean, we hear a lot from organizations that have got a lot of, cross-functional teams,
Mm-hmm.
different verticals, different business areas, and they all do things differently. And they all probably think they're doing it the best. And maybe they are, maybe they're doing it really well, but there's no real consistency. And so when we talk about root cause analysis, it's two things. First of
Mm-hmm.
all, are you working with a methodology and a structure that gives you outcomes when you need them? So when you deploy it for a single investigation at a point in time at a particular site, are you getting the findings and the outcomes that helps you fix that issue? That's the first thing. That should be the easy thing.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is, well, what are we learning from that? Okay, so for a site at an organizational level, what are we doing with that information? What are we doing with that data? How does our root cause analysis system, approach, methodology help us learn at scale? So it's not just about having something that you can take out of the cupboard when you've got to use it and dust it off and get some learnings and move on from it. It's what are we doing with that all the time? So how is that root cause analysis machine giving us the insights organically, regularly,
Mm-hmm.
to say, okay, well, actually, this is becoming a trend because one investigation at one site will learn one thing. It's amazing what other sites are also learning. If we're not joining the dots on that information and that intelligence, as we would describe it, then really, are we really benefiting from root cause analysis? So it can be easy to think we're effective if we're operating in silos, and there might be good reason for that. But if we are doing that, we're probably not learning at more of a macro at scale level, and we are definitely losing out on a lot of opportunities. So effective RCA looks like doing it well on one-off occasions, Monika, but you need to have the ability to look at it as a whole program or discipline as well. Many organizations aren't as good at that as they might think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add on to that, and I think it's one of the most positive things about our partnership with Comet is that I don't know how many colleagues that I've had throughout my career, and now working with Intellects, where I see a lot of our clients using some of those same frameworks. I would just, and not to pick on 5Y, but 5Y has
You
been
can pick on
just
5Y,
this.
it's fine.
Well, I would pick on it this way, is that if I were to lead a 5Y during an investigation process, I'm very convinced that I could do it very well because I know the right questions to ask to get
Mm-hmm.
us to the beginning to understand what root causes were. But what I've seen
Mhm.
is that we have used that process and we've asked the wrong questions to try to get down to the root cause. So it's very incomplete. I think it's one of the things, and I'll embellish this, is why we strategically partnered with COMET, because we needed to have more framework, more methodology of
Mhm.
getting down to why things actually happen. And it really kind of goes down to, in my mind, to where the work actually happens. You stand where the worker stands when you're doing root cause analysis properly. You talk to the people who do that job every day when you talk about this. With
Mhm.
the benefit of understanding root cause, you ask about workarounds, you ask about time pressure, you ask what normal actually looks like versus what the design said it should look like. So we just keep pressing through these comfortable answers that many times we accepted right over
Mhm.
time. So failure to follow a procedure is never going to be a root cause. It's
Mhm.
a prompt to ask why that procedure did not work for them. So that's root cause. I've seen this happen over and over and
Mhm.
over again. And I think it's because it feels like it's easy, but it's not easy. If we don't find the root cause that actually sustainably helps us mitigate
Mhm.
or eliminate that issue, then we're short-sighted, right? In what we should be doing as practitioners. And I think it names the blunt end. You know, Craig and I've talked about sharp end, blunt end, right? If every corrective action lands on the worker, the analysis did not go deep enough.
Mhm.
That's a good point. I think what a lot of industries are missing, it's not actually finding that root cause, it's taking it one step further and actually realizing that they need to go deeper. So, Craig, do you have any advice for organizations that they can pick up on signals where they're stopping too early or they haven't gone deep enough or they don't even know that it's a problem? There's things that they can look out for.
Yeah, no, I think that's again a useful kind of segue into a conversation that really allows us to talk about, you know, what is the true purpose again of doing a root cause analysis. I mean, often some of the challenges that come with that are knowing where to start, knowing where to end. At what point do we move on from the investigation to saying, well,
Yeah,
we're establishing what happened. When do we move on to finding out the root cause? When's the right time to do that? When do we actually? How do we know our actions are going to be effective? An
Mhm.
investigation contains so many unknowns, and you have to have a structured methodology that signposts what you're doing, when you're doing it, and why you're doing it, right? And and of course I'm going to sit here and talk about COMET, but there are many different ways in which that of course
Mhm.
can be done. So I think some of the signs that people have got to look out for are, if you get to a point when you're doing a root cause analysis, right? Because doing an investigation versus a root cause analysis are different things. People might not think about that, but they are. And often we want to jump too quickly into root cause analysis because we want to get the outcomes. And Scott mentioned it on that leadership want the results on my desk in 24 hours, and that's not always feasible, right? So we do jump ahead.
Mhm.
One of the things that we often see is when you're doing a root cause analysis and you're trying to get to that why, if at that point in time you are still using assumptions, you are still using a little bit of opinion information at that point, or you have a process that allows you to kind of ask certain questions to get the right outcome of the root cause analysis, and you don't necessarily know the answers to those factually, you've probably not done the investigation right. Okay, so that kind of input is
yeah,
really important. So I think that's
Mhm.
probably one of the first things is if you just don't know and you're still making assumptions at that stage and you've gone there a little bit too quickly, then you're really going to go back a step. So when it comes to root cause analysis, it should actually be a case of validating what you've learned in the investigation
Mhm.
and establishing these are the root cause outcomes that we're now going to fix. So you shouldn't really be learning anything new when it comes to that stage. It should be validating what you've learned in the investigation in a structured way that allows you to then say, okay, we've worked through all of that. That's the input. That's how we've broken it down. These are the four root cause outcomes that we're now going to go and address with 2 or 3 really good actions. That's a really simple linear method that allows you to do it, but the checks and balances keep you right. So the longer you go in that process, if you still have questions at the end about why it happened and how it happened and what happened,
Mhm.
then you've probably not actually done that initial investigation properly in the first place. Whilst
Mhm.
there will always be gaps and challenges,
Mhm.
we have to have an honest view of that. So that's one of the things we often see is, well, Craig, how do we know when to move on or when we're finished? Well, you'll know by the status of your outcomes and how easy it was to get to that point.
yeah.
That's our advice.
Yeah. I would just add to that is that, if you're finished with your investigation and your corrective action looks like retrain, rewrite,
Yeah,
remind,
yeah,
you didn't get to the end point of where you needed to get to. And I've
yeah,
often said this as I've counseled practitioners, if you see repeat incidents, that's always a signal that the prior investigation stopped too short. There was a system condition that caused that first incident that you never addressed. So it's
yeah,
always going to be a big need to go to that next stage of understanding of really why did we see that and why are we seeing it again, right? So investigation quality, I think it's the single biggest lever most organizations don't pull very well, and it costs nothing, but it does require some discipline. And I think Craig said it well: is that the purpose of framework and methodology is discipline, so we can do these, so we can repeat them over and over and over again. And when I led a very big organization, I taught everyone methodology of going from an immediate cause to a root cause. Why? Because it turned them into risk managers. They started understanding not only what could happen, but why it could happen. And it's a really, really important lever to pull because it affects the culture of the organization. So doing this well is really a culture driver if you really spend the time and the discipline to do it.
A topic that we chatted about on the first episode was utilizing AI to help kind of provide some of that information. Craig, do you think that AI should be implemented in these to provide that data and make sense of it? Or do you think it's more of a hindrance?
I think it can be a hindrance if the user doesn't know how they want to use the AI, right? I think there's a lot of talk now about, okay, we have AI as an option, well, we should be
Yeah.
using it. Yeah, sounds good. Well, why? What are you using it for? And there's a big, big difference when it comes to how you apply AI. There's a big difference between utilizing an open AI mechanism and applying it to an investigation versus
Mm.
using AI that's been designed for investigations. That's a significant difference. We talk about AI and we utilize AI that's in the workflow, right? So if we think about that from a perspective, and I know, obviously, you guys are really across the kind of input versus insights AI. And if you think about that from an investigation
Mhm.
standpoint, you want to have an investigator that's assisted by AI, that prompts, guides, suggests things, that highlights gaps they might have missed, that the human brain might have missed.
Mhm.
But the investigator or that team still ought to validate the outcome. So we cannot become over reliant on AI. That's a huge risk, right? And actually, we would talk about still practicing investigations without AI because we still remain and retain that skill set. So we don't want to suffer from skill fade. If we become over reliant on that, whilst it can be very, very effective, and I think in this day and age, it's probably becoming an organizational expectation. So we should embrace the change. But it has to be utilized in the right way for the right reasons. And nothing at all should ever prevent the investigation team from making the final decision, particularly on root causes and outcomes. It can guide what happened, it can guide your understanding of immediate causes and human factor problems and some of the barriers or controls that might not have quite been that effective. That's all
Mhm.
useful context, right? But when it comes to validating root causes and getting those right actions at the end of it, I think the human still has to be responsible for that. So we should be embracing AI from a perspective of let's get as much help as we can. Let's save 50% of our time. Let's increase our quality output by 80%. Brilliant. But let's not remove the human from that workflow ever. And of course, from a data perspective, well, brilliant. What a great tool to ask a really simple question in terms of what's
Mhm.
my what's my top trending root cause in the last 3 months across all facilities, and what are the common theme human factors and barriers that are allowing that to happen. What a great way to interact with the tool, and you get that information instantly. So we have to embrace the power that gives us, but the
Mhm.
human must retain all decision making about what we do with that data and how we use that AI in investigation. So it's a big yes from me, but with caution, right? With caution.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I totally agree with that. I use AI every single day, but mostly from the side of helping me do my job better, right? Or to check me on some of the things that I think, right? Are there two things that I may have forgotten, right, in this path of thought that I want to have? I
Mhm.
think it's good for that. I think it's good for helping me be better.
Mhm.
Is it a replacement for me? No, and I don't think it is I think it's exactly how Craig has talked about it. It's to help us be better, be more efficient, to think about things that maybe we didn't think about, but especially for this type of work where majority of our investigation time is with a person, right? That's had some type of output that we need to understand. And I've told practitioners, because it's one of the big things that I talk about at conferences. It's one of the questions that I get: is AI going to replace me? One of the things that AI is not good about is understanding that that person is having a relationship problem. That person is going through some production pressure to try to perform at a level above his or her capability. So those are things that AI is not good about. And that's
Mhm.
where it kind of comes down to the gut of a practitioner to see those things, to read those things intellectually, and then being able to create that story or to absorb that story much differently than what technology can do. And it's the same thing, Monica, that we've done with intellects, right? We're not positioning AI as the answer to every problem that you'll have. What we're trying to do with AI is to position you, to make you more efficient, to make you a better practitioner, to get
Mhm.
you to those decisions that we really think that you need to make as a practitioner leading a program.
No, I agree. And I think a lot of people have this fear that AI will replace their jobs or they're going to become redundant because AI can do it better. And I think you both made such a great point that it's a tool to help you do what you do better, not what you do, period. Um, on the podcast, I love to have real world examples of stories. So, Craig, starting with you, do you have an example or a story about an investigation that led to a change and how that was different? How was it approached? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Without divulging details, of course,
Of
of who
course.
and when and all the rest of it. But yeah, I mean, I suppose I've been, depends on how you look at it, fortunate or unfortunate to have been involved in many industry-based investigations over the last decade, I would
Hmm.
say. And often from our perspective, when we come in as an independent third party to assist in the process, assist in getting the right outcome, every organization does that a little bit differently. And the ones that are certainly the ones that are open to feedback and really
Hmm.
seeing it as an opportunity to learn tend to get more out of it. We had one particular example. It was actually now, gosh, 2018, so maybe 7 8 years ago now. We were working with an oil and gas operator in North Sea waters, and they'd suffered a particularly nasty incident. Unfortunately, one of the rig crew did during a lifting operation, and they suffered permanent disfigure injury through their on their left hand. And unfortunately, the reason that we were actually drafted in to help with that is because there were some late administration changes made within some lifting plans, and that red flag to the onshore team is what allowed us to get involved, because they felt there was some foul play involved. Fortunately, the investigation that we assisted with discovered that that wasn't the case. And that initial assumption on the human error, which was they thought were trying to deceive the outcome of the investigation, was actually just a genuine error at the time and had no bearing on the investigation itself. And so they went into that with a real objective, I think, to
Hmm.
not just deal with the issue in terms of the incident, but they were hunting somebody. And their perspective in that investigation, which lasted about 2 to 3 weeks, their perspective changed, and that person kept their job,
Hmm.
rightfully so. And they learned that actually the system that people were utilizing was
Hmm.
showing delays in certain inputs of data, and that's where that discrepancy came from. So they got two learnings. They got learnings from the incident itself, that the actual lift in the operation. Okay, that was pretty straightforward. The real issue with the human interaction and the amending of these plans retrospectively, which actually
Hmm.
turns out wasn't the case. They got more learnings from that. And I think from a management team, they probably realized, whoa, we were very close to making an assumption there that would have probably let somebody lose their job, and that
Hmm.
would have been entirely unfair in the circumstances. So that's one that always jumps to mind, because there was multitude of learnings, but there was a real awakening, I think, with the management team to say, "Oh, we've got to be a bit more careful about the assumptions we make." And I think anyone who goes into an investigation should always be careful of the assumptions that you make at the beginning, because rarely do those assumptions come true.
Scott, any stories from your
Oh boy,
three
quite
long
a few.
history?
I'll tell one. Earlier in my career, I worked a fatality investigation. I led that work. where a worker was killed while performing unplanned maintenance on a piece of equipment that wasn't isolated. And the easy finding in all of that was failure to lock out.
Mm.
The real finding was a work system that had all of this uncontrolled variability. We had long, complicated procedures in that facility. We had inadequate guarding on this piece of equipment. We had insufficient maintenance planning. And really, we just had this culture that had normalized all these shortcuts.
Mm.
Why? Because this person was good, because this person was fast, because this person had a lot of knowledge of the equipment. So we started normalizing all of these different shortcuts in that facility because, quote, we trusted that that person could do that job successfully. And probably that person had done this many times before, except this time it caught him. So
Mhm.
once we named the system, the change was quite structural. You know, equipment redesign. We simplified procedures. We improved training to make sure that we were validating, their skill level. Maintenance planning was overhauled. Supervisor accountability. Right, there was just a lot of things, and I think there was nothing about that event that was one person's choice, right? It was an organizational choice comprised of a lot of different factors. And I think that if there's one thing that we get out of today's podcast, it's that is that there are a tremendous amount of factors that contribute to outputs that at times,
Mhm.
cause or create an incident that was a fatality in this case. I would add this too, Monica, and I won't talk about it but I've seen near miss investigations drive bigger change than serious
Mm.
injury investigations because organizations just have the emotional space to look at it honestly. And I think that if I could tell anyone before we end today, is that if we can start looking at things more honestly, the best learning comes from those events that maybe didn't hurt anyone.
Mm. It's like you've done this podcast with me before. I always like to end the podcast with a piece of advice for the listeners. So I'm going to pose it back to you, Craig. Is there one thing that organizations should do to improve investigations starting tomorrow? And if so, what would it be?
Just one thing, Monica. Is that it? Just one bit of advice
If
I've
you
got to
had
try
to,
and.
Maybe
or if you
two
had to pick
things, two or
maybe
three
two
things.
things.
Yeah, a couple of things. Okay. I think probably aimed at organizations that take it seriously, that are maturing in this space.
Mhm.
We'll probably sit here and think, yeah, look, we know root cause isn't a human error.
Mhm.
We know that we've got to look closer at ourselves, but in
Mhm.
reality, actually, are we doing that? So I think an action takeaway has to be, let's be serious about our next investigation.
Mhm.
Let's make a point of getting ourselves uncomfortable. Okay, so taking it back to that point earlier on, I think there
Mhm.
also has to be a realization that can be very, very difficult, particularly for investigation teams that are doing this as their
Mhm.
not as their day job, right? Because investigators or organizations rarely employ full-time investigation resources that only do that. It's people that get that bolted onto their day job, and that creates additional pressures.
Yeah.
So I think relieving that pressure a little bit and saying, well, actually, you know what? We're going to do our best here, but we might not get it right or perfect every time. But we're going to be honest. We're going to be transparent,
Mhm.
and we're going to dedicate that through a really healthy reporting culture.
Mhm.
Outcomes that lead to people losing their jobs are rarely outcomes that the organization are going to learn and benefit from. So I think
Mhm.
there has to be a maturity in that space as well. And again, we're in the year of 2026. I'd like to think that would be it. So my two bits of
Yeah.
advice would be, let's make a point on the next swing of doing things a little bit differently,
Mhm.
and let's make ourselves uncomfortable. The second one would be, let's accept that we're not always going to fix everything in one go. That's not possible. Deal
Mhm.
with what's in front of you, deal with even the low hanging fruit, and accept we might not get it right. But you know what? That's okay, because the important point with this is it's where you begin and where you start, not where you end, right? That's just a journey. And if we start honestly and we look at ourselves honestly, then you're just going to open up the door to better insights and feedback. So the more you involve people in that, you have that kind of honest reporting culture. It's a win-win situation, but it won't happen overnight either.
Well said. Well said. Scott, any
Yeah.
final
Yeah.
words?
Well, I would say this yeah, I've always got a final word, right? And it
We
usually
know.
spurred on by something that Craig mentioned, but I would say the strongest safety and health programs that I've been a part of, they treat data, they treat reporting, they treat investigations, they treat auditing and inspections all as one system. We don't look at all of these things as separate workflows owned by three separate people or three separate parts of the organization. And many times, then, when I work with clients, even at Intellects, they may buy just the incident management application from Intellects, and they'll never go further than that. And I often wonder because you could use the same framework, the same methodology that COMET has partnered with us to demonstrate on auditing, on investigate, on inspections, right? Why am I seeing these same problems over and over again when I audit an area? Those are really clear signs that we need to understand data much differently. So I think reporting feeds data. Data reveals patterns. Patterns sharpen investigations, and investigations produce learning. And then learning changes the work, right? So that's really how I look at all of this is that if we want actual change, we want to tighten that loop of what goes on in the work process. And so, I would say this, and I think Craig has said it well, is that there's a lot of organizations that break this loop somewhere, right? They collect data, they don't analyze it or understand it, they investigate, but they don't share learning or go deep enough with that learning. They
Mm-hmm.
share learning, don't change the work. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if I had one challenge to every other practitioner that has shared my chair, look at your loop very, very honestly and see where it's broken. And that's where your next improvement is hiding. And I think Craig is exactly right. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to figure this all out tomorrow, right? But you can start tomorrow, right? You can make incremental change in your process and grow from there.
Well said. I mic drop, I guess. And I think that is the biggest takeaway. The moral of this episode is that it's not just about collecting data or completing investigations. It's actually about learning in a way that really changes the system. Um, Craig, Scott, thank you both. This has been such an insightful conversation. I'm so happy we were able to continue it from the first episode. For everybody listening, if you are interested in learning more about investigation methodologies and the work that Craig, Mark, and team are doing, you can visit cometanalysis.com and explore everything that they're doing further. We also did do a masterclass with them, which was also equally insightful. But I think this episode really hit the nail on the head for so many important conversations that need to happen. And it starts with just taking a deeper look, being uncomfortable, taking that data and actually looking into it with a little bit bigger lens than what you do now. Craig, Scott, thank you again. I don't even know how to end this episode. It's just such a great conversation. You guys covered so many great things. And if we have more conversations coming up, I'd love to have you back. And Craig, anything you want to conclude the episode with?
No, if you'll have me back, I'll be delighted to be here. But yeah, I think Scott and I could probably sit all day and talk about this stuff. So you'll be glad to know we're not right now.
Probably.
No, thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We will catch you on the next one.